Hey everyone, it's time for the Linux and open source news again. And this week we've got what I can only call basically spyware being implemented in a lot of browser extensions. We also have the GNOME Foundation saying they actually want to fund GNOME development and developers, which is, I think, good. And we also have the Wayback project being added to the freedesktop.org umbrella, among a lot of other things, including a pretty important ruling in Germany against Meta and tracking in terms of privacy that will probably matter a lot. And we also have this segue to our sponsor. You probably all know about Proton and their end-to-end and zero-access encrypted suite of services. You've got email, contacts, calendars, a password manager, storage space, but also a VPN. And Proton VPN does a lot of stuff. Since it comes with its NetShield ad blocker, it means that running Proton VPN on your phone or on your computer will also block all ads, including these annoying mobile ads that you might experience on your phone. Switching between different Proton VPN servers also lets you overcome the IP-based restrictions, like not being able to watch something based on the country you're in or how many articles you've read for a certain day or week. This all goes away as soon as you use Proton VPN and switch between servers regularly. And of course it does everything a VPN does, which is protect your online activity with a no-log policy, a fully open source application and codebase, and it's regularly audited independently as well. I use Proton VPN almost every day. You can do so too. You'll have a link in the description of this video. So let's begin with browser extensions, because it seems like there's a new wave of terrible crap. A bunch of browser extensions are implementing a specific library called Mellotel. This is something that is meant to pay developers of those browser extensions in exchange for adding that library, because that library is used to scrape the content that is visited by the browser extension's users, and it is then sold to a bunch of AI startups. So AI startups pay the Mellotel developers to get all of that scraped data, whether it be publicly accessible or not, and then the Mellotel developers pay the extensions developers 55% of what they make, and they keep 45%. Basically, as a user, you install an extension that does, I don't know, better bookmarks or clipboard management or audio volume boosting or whatever else. And then, without your knowledge, the web pages you visit are scraped and their contents are sent to AI companies. This includes any personal file, company, private document, anything that you open basically in your browsing session, whether it is publicly available or not. Mellotel also sends some personal info like location at the country level, your available bandwidth, and a few other things to their own servers. The way this extension works is also pretty insecure because it injects iframes into the page you're viewing. This iframe loads a lot of different various websites, which are basically the AI startup websites, which can then scrape the content of the page itself. There is really no way of seeing which websites are being opened in these iframes unless you open your developer tools, which, as we all know, not many users really do in day-to-day browsing. And also, this thing works on extensions built with Manifest v2, the older API, but also Manifest v3. All in all, this is a horrible misuse of browser extensions and extension APIs, which leads to content scraping, including highly personal stuff. Now, the developers of this library answered the technical criticism, but they never really assuaged any problems with the highly unethical way that this library works, because yes, they do give users a way to opt out of scraping certain websites. The problem is no user knows that they have access to this webpage or that they use this library in the first place, because extension developers don't tell their users the library is packaged in, because if they did, everyone would uninstall the extension because it is spyware. So to the trash it goes with every single extension that uses it. Fortunately, some extension stores have started removing extensions that package this thing. This should not exist. It is abuse of every single possible API. It is horrendous. Now, it looks like the GNOME Foundation wants to take a more direct role in funding GNOME developers. Currently, the GNOME Foundation just does things around GNOME, meaning they organize the developer conference called the GWADEC, they do communication, marketing, events, infrastructure, and the like. but the GNOME Foundation rarely directly supported GNOME developers. Most GNOME developers are paid by companies in the Linux and open source ecosystem or through grants and fellowships. The new GNOME Foundation Executive Director, Stephen Diobald, said that this will change. Once the Foundation's basic expenses are met, which apparently they're not currently, they want to redirect the remaining funds towards GNOME developers through grants and fellowships. He says that first, the project's governance and management must be rock solid to know where they should focus efforts and funds, because paying developers if you don't know what you actually want to achieve doesn't really work, but it does look like the end goal is to pay people to write code, which is something I find 100% great. To help with this goal, a donation notification, like the one KDE implemented, is in discussion to ask users once or twice a year if they would like to support the project. The strategy has worked really well for KDE, for Blender, for Thunderbird and the like. There's basically no reason to think it wouldn't work for GNOME. Of course, this is all still in discussion. It might not happen in GNOME 49, but maybe more for GNOME 50 next year. Finally, they also put in place a plan to better manage financial risk for the foundation with reduced spending, better annual projections, and clearer reporting around their finances. It all sounds like a sound plan, and I think, yes, the GNOME Foundation should pay for GNOME development. It's all well and nice to organize the community around it, but the main project is GNOME, so this is what should get a lot of the money, I think, at least. As per the donation notification, I think it's good. No one really complained about the KDE one, at least no one who really thought about it complained about it. It's a good solution, you can disable it. If it's done in the same kind of way, it should work really well for GNOME, and I think it's just a good idea, basically. It's not nagware if it's only once or twice a year. Now, the Wayback project is now hosted on freedesktop.org. I already talked about this compatibility layer. This aims to be a better solution than X-Wayland for specific cases where you really need everything that X11 can offer and that doesn't work on Wayland. This was started on a personal repo by a developer of the Alpine Linux project, but it seems that there's enough interest around it that the freedesktop.org umbrella deemed it worthy. The project is still in its infancy, it won't be ready before 2026 according to its developer, but at least this gives it a bit more clout, a bit more visibility. They also gained a logo in the process, which is the X11 logo, but with a W basically, kind of a fun throwback. Now, the way I understand it, Wayback just runs a very basic Wayland compositor that then lets you start a traditional X11 window manager or an entire X11 desktop, which means that every single app or desktop that you want to run with the entire X11 feature set works, compared to X-Wayland, which runs an X11 app as a Wayland client, so that app is still constrained by Wayland's limitations, where with Wayback it wouldn't be, at least when trying to talk with other apps run under that X11 window manager and server. So you'll have your full-on Wayland session for people like me who don't really need anything else. You have X-Wayland for running games and older software, and if that's really not enough for you and Wayland still lacks a few things, you'll have Wayback that lets you run everything else. I think it's the best way forward. Instead of looking backwards to 1991 and trying to retrofit new stuff onto that super old code base, it's just bringing the feature set into the modern present, which I think is much better than other alternative solutions. Now, the GNOME 49 Alpha was released this week with a few interesting changes. So first, obviously the X11 session, as planned, is now disabled by default in GDM and wherever it was made available. It will be entirely removed in GNOME 50, so distros still currently have an option to add it back in for GNOME 49, but it's likely that with GNOME 50 you just will not be able to run a GNOME X11 session at all. GDM will also now depend on systemd more than it did, and the non-systemd fallback will be removed. This is not the case in the alpha currently, but it has been announced as being a firm thing that will happen in the beta, so distros will have some time to prepare for it. Apart from that, there's Papers replacing Events, Showtime replacing Totem, a redesign of the GNOME web address bar, many new features for the GNOME calculator, better accessibility in GNOME Calendar with keyboard navigation, no more Windows Live option in the GNOME Online accounts, touch support for the GNOME Remote Desktop app, better performance in the shell, and a lot more. Now we'll see how this move to more Wayland and more systemd goes. I have a feeling that distributions that already did not like systemd and did not like Wayland and refused to ship them didn't really like GNOME, because GNOME has always been a strong proponent of both of these projects, so I don't think it will really affect a lot of people, but it will affect some people in the long run. So we'll have to see if this affects the fact that GNOME is currently the most prevalent desktop environment, at least as the default in the major, most popular Linux distros. We'll see if this changes that status quo or not, but I think it makes sense for the GNOME project. If you didn't like GNOME, you will not like it more with these changes, you probably will hate it more, and if you liked GNOME's direction and Wayland and systemd, this really is not a problem for you. So personally, I don't mind, I use those things, I think they work, it's fine. Now, Bazzite, the sort of Fedora-based gaming distro, has a new app store called Bazaar. I wanted to test it in my recent awesome Linux apps video, but I couldn't compile it at all on my system. It just wouldn't. The libraries that it needs just weren't available to me on the latest Ubuntu LTS, at least, which is the base for the distro I currently use. And also, this thing did not work properly in the testing images I downloaded and tried to run in a VM. So I left it out of the video. Basically, Bazaar is a new app store focused on Flatpak that is apparently much faster than GNOME software, but also looks much better. It offers recommendations, a curated list of packages, full-screen screenshots, an adaptive interface with multiple columns. It looks like a fantastic storefront, and personally, if I ever go back to GNOME, this is probably what I will use to install all of my apps, because I only use Flatpaks and FlatHub, and this app store is just much better, at least on paper and in visuals, than the GNOME software one. We'll see if it's stable, if it works on other distros. Now, as AI weaves its way into more and more of the current proprietary offerings, Google is also now making their own AI tool, Gemini, capable of accessing third-party apps. This can be turned off, but by default, Gemini will be able to interact with third-party Android applications, and so human reviewers will have access and the right to read, annotate, and process the data that Gemini collected from those third-party non-Google apps. So basically, if you use Android apps that access certain Android frameworks, they will just give out the data that passes through these frameworks and APIs. They will give out this data to Google. Now, the email Google sent to multiple users seems to say that Gemini will have access to these apps, whether you enabled the Gemini apps activity setting or not. Basically, that setting only means that it's gonna not keep the data you input into Gemini itself, but the data it collects through third-party apps through this integration will still be collected and kept. Now, fortunately, you can force remove this crap from your Android phone using ADB. You can uninstall Gemini, which you probably should if you have a phone that comes with it, but that's not something most people will know how to do or will do, which means most people who use a regular basic Android ROM will have Gemini pre-installed, and it means that every single app that they use, which has plugs into Gemini to ask Gemini to do stuff in these apps, well, Google will get all that data. Of course, if you don't use an official Android ROM from Google, so maybe not a Pixel, or maybe not a generic Android phone that just flashes Android as is, you're probably not affected. Like Samsung is not shipping Gemini, as far as I know, they're shipping their own AI crap. Other providers will probably also ship their own stuff, but if you do use this, do know that Gemini will just siphon data from any third-party app that has an integration with it. So if you can ask Gemini to do something in an app, it has access to the data of this app and it will give it to Google, which I don't think is a good thing. Now, in terms of web browsers, the performance gap between Chromium and Firefox is about to widen a bit more. Google is replacing their older Skia Ganesh rendering backend with Skia Graphite, which basically trades using OpenGL for Vulkan, Metal, or DirectX 12, depending on where you're running your browser. This change apparently raises their motion mark score by 15%, which is just a benchmark number, but it's still an indication of faster rendering of web pages and elements. The main difference is that Ganesh was meant to support mobile devices of the time as well as PCs, and this limited them to the lowest common denominator, which was OpenGL ES. That's not the most powerful of APIs nowadays. It has very limited support for shaders and multi-threading, and so moving to Vulkan, Metal, and DirectX 12 is just much better. They're more advanced, and they're now available for mobile devices as well, apart from DirectX 12. Now, of course, this is a good thing for Chromium-based users. More speed is nice. It also apparently results in lower VRAM consumption, which is also good. The problem is Firefox is already lagging behind in terms of performance, in terms of smoothness, and sometimes even in terms of resource consumption. So Google taking the lead yet again means that Firefox is just less of an interesting proposition, and that seems to be the trend currently, which I don't like, because while Chromium users or Chromium-based browsers users will be very happy about this change, it also means that Firefox is less viable, there's less competition in terms of browser rendering engines, and so we're basically handing the keys of the entire internet and its feature set to Google, which is not good. Now, you might remember Plasma Big Screen, an effort to provide a Plasma shell to televisions, with a set of apps that can be navigated with a remote. This thing launched a few years back, but it was relatively quickly left by the wayside, especially since it depended on Mycroft skills. Mycroft was a voice/AI sort of home assistant, and this thing is no more. A few developers decided to pick the project back up, to pick Plasma Big Screen back up, or at least to give it a little coat of polish, notably making the interface look much nicer, adding a search feature based on KRunner, redesigning the system settings to work better with a remote with a dual pane layout, a sidebar, and the like, and also porting multiple settings modules to be usable with a remote. They also fixed the splash screen that appears when opening an application, and it's apparently already a much better experience than what it was previously. Apparently, a few apps available on FlatHub work well with that interface, like Kodi, VacuumTube, which is a YouTube wrapper, Aura Browser, or the Planck Media Player. But do not expect to find stuff like Netflix, Amazon Prime, Hulu, whatever else in there. You'll have to try and run these in a browser and hope that the DRM plugin works. There are some issues with the whole thing though. It doesn't have a virtual keyboard that supports arrow navigation, meaning you can't really input text without a keyboard. This should be fixed with the new Plasma virtual keyboard being developed, but it's not there yet. There's also no specific framework to build applications designed for TVs and remotes, and also they need to define the goals of the project. Is this still something anyone wants to focus on or not? Still, it is nice to see this thing up and running again. There are plenty of use cases where I would like to have a Linux-powered set-top box. If I can use, KDE Connect to input some text into this. If I can very easily, from my Plasma desktop, share my screen or share a game that's playing from my PC to my TV, that would also be nice in terms of setup. It would also be cool to be able to install an app from FlatHub on my PC directly to the set-top box. A bunch of things like this could be easily integrated, and honestly, I don't really do much streaming these days. It's all hosted on my own Plex server, so I don't quite care about all the other apps. I would like to use this, but of course it needs people behind it, people working on it, and people who want to work on it, and if there's basically no use case for anyone, I can fully understand why this thing would not keep going. Now, as the Stop Killing Games petition is growing pretty big, a trade association called Video Games Europe, representing many big video game publishers like Activision Blizzard, Bandai Namco, Epic Games, Nintendo, Sega, Ubisoft, Riot, and others, they are now trying to push back against the success of that petition. Basically, it's a lobbying association. When you see trade association and big companies behind it, it's just a lobby. They say that discontinuing online services has to be an option for companies when games aren't commercially viable anymore. And they say players are given fair notice when this happens. They also say private servers are not always a viable solution because it would leave the company liable for various data breaches, illegal content, and the like. And they also conclude by saying some games are designed to be online only, and implementing what the petition is asking for would make game development too expensive. Now, this all sounds reasonable on the surface, but it's really not. First, sure, you might give fair notice that you're gonna take away something someone paid for, but you're still taking away something someone paid for without any compensation. Basically, someone bought something from you, and you're saying, no, it doesn't work, which should probably not be as easy to do as it currently is unless your company is going under. Second, the liability thing is BS. A lot of open source projects come with a specific license or sometimes an end user license agreement that prevents any liability or warranty coming from the open source project. You're not going to tell me that these big companies don't have lawyers that could draft such agreements or end user license agreements. It is just nonsense to think that this is a problem. Now, I'm not saying that all of this is a no-brainer. It will have costs for companies if they ever try to implement this, which they will not if they're not forced to legally, but they kinda still need to, because players are really losing trust and confidence in all gaming companies. Everyone basically hates them. They charge way too much, they take away your games, they take away your microtransactions, they reset servers regularly. It's just not fun anymore in a lot of cases, and it also doesn't really feel fair or ethical. I think even just implementing some of what the petition asks for would bring a lot of goodwill and a lot of happiness to a lot of players, but obviously these companies are in there for the money and for shareholders, so unless there's actual law that forces them to actively support their games or give at least a way to run a private server without any liability to the company, they will never do so. And let's conclude with a pretty big privacy ruling in Germany. A German court dished out what might be the most impactful ruling in terms of privacy. The judge found that Meta's tracking pixels and SDKs that are used by many mobile applications and websites to gather data about users, to link that data to Facebook's databases, and then to display targeted ads, well, those SDKs and tracking pixels apparently don't conform to the GDPR because they do collect user data without user knowledge or consent. This was a lawsuit from a single individual who was awarded 5,000 euros in damages. And you might say, how is that important? Exactly, they regularly get multi-million or billion-dollar fines, so why does that matter? The reason this matters is that the judge said that they are perfectly aware that granting this 5,000 euros to this German citizen means any other German citizen could sue the company for the same thing and basically auto-win their lawsuit without having to prove any damage. Meaning that out of the, 70 million German citizens currently, probably half of those could reclaim 5,000 euros for free by not doing a single thing, apart from a little bit of paperwork. Because basically everyone is affected. If you browse the web, whether you're logged into Facebook or Instagram or not, a lot of websites will have those tracking pixels and SDKs, and so it is highly likely that you encounter them and that some data about you was collected without your consent, which means you are eligible for this money, at least in Germany. And a consultancy firm called this lawsuit business breaking, and I can't disagree because even if no one manifests themselves to reclaim their money, it's how virtually every single data-based business model operates. This is pretty big. We'll have to see if it holds or not. I'm not sure if there's an appeal possible by Meta against this, because they probably don't care about the 5,000 euros, but they probably do care about their entire business model being illegal in Germany, and this could potentially also spread to other EU countries, making the entire ad business or tracking business completely unviable in the EU entirely. We'll have to see where it goes. Maybe it will just stop there, but if it spreads, it could mean a lot of changes are coming to the ad-based economy, which would be pretty disastrous for a lot of people and a lot of companies, but also very interesting. Interesting, just like the devices made by our sponsor, Tuxedo Computers. If you're a long-time listener of the show or anything else I do, you know about Tuxedo Computers. They make laptops and desktops that ship with Linux pre-installed. The reason why it matters is because, well, you know that the hardware actually works well with Linux and you don't have to sweat to make sure that things will run properly. They also have a big range of devices, plenty of options, plenty of customization, and personally, I only use their computers to do everything in my daily life. I don't use a computer from another brand. So if you need a new device and you want to run Linux on it, and you want to support a company that actively contributes to Linux, then the link to Tuxedo Computers is in the description. So this will conclude today's episode. I hope you enjoyed listening to it. As always, if you did, don't hesitate to click all the usual YouTube buttons. You also know where all the links are to support the show. You can get plenty of super cool advantages for very, very little money each month. Do check that out. In the meantime, thank you all for supporting the show. Thank you all for watching and or listening. And I guess you'll see me in the next one. Bye.